Night had already swallowed the street when the group stepped out from the alley, moving like a single shadow with many limbs. They weren't there by coincidence. Someone with a grudge had paid them well, expecting a show of violence, expecting to watch a spirit crumble. The gang came ready for chaos, armed with bravado, cold instincts, and a hunger for fear. Yet as they approached the person they were sent to break, something in the air shifted. The target didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't beg. There was a stillness around them that didn't match the scene. A calm that didn't belong in a moment shaped by danger. The gang felt it before they understood it. Fear drains power. Calm steals it. And what they saw standing under the dim streetlight wasn't prey. It was someone who had walked through storms far worse than anything a group of hired men could deliver. One of the men stepped forward first, expecting the usual reaction: panic, trembling, bargaining. Instead, he saw a face softened by exhaustion yet sharpened by experience. There was no arrogance in the expression, only acceptance. A quiet acknowledgement that life had pushed them to this edge many times before. Pain had never been optional in their story. Survival, however, had become a skill. The gang member froze in place. Violence thrives on uneven ground. When the target doesn't fear the blow, the attacker is left confronting himself. The man's fist remained suspended halfway, as if something inside him refused to complete the motion. He couldn't understand why his chest felt tight. Then it struck him. It wasn't hesitation. It was respect for someone he had never spoken to. The others noticed the hesitation and stepped closer. But once they saw the target clearly, their aggression faltered too. Hard men who believed themselves heartless suddenly felt something uncomfortable rising within them. Shame. Because in the presence of someone who carried scars with dignity, their own actions felt small, ridiculous, childish. The job they had accepted so casually now looked like a mirror, reflecting their own emptiness. They weren't confronting a fragile soul. They were confronting a survivor carved from quiet strength. And for the first time in a long time, they felt embarrassed by the version of themselves that had shown up to deliver harm. That kind of realization hits deeper than any punch ever could. The target did not move, did not speak, did not defend themselves. The silence itself felt like a challenge. A reminder that the worst wounds in life never come from fists. They come from people who once pretended to care. The gang sensed that this wasn't a stranger hardened by the streets. This was someone shaped by betrayal, heartbreak, abandonment. Someone who had been broken by the very people meant to protect them. And that kind of pain creates a different kind of resilience. One that cannot be intimidated, only understood. The gang felt the weight of that truth in their bones. Their anger evaporated, their pride cracked, their humanity surfaced. One of them stepped closer, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw a tired kind of bravery. The kind that says, "I've survived worse than you," without ever needing to speak it. He saw how the person carried themselves. Not with bravado, not with defiance, but with acceptance of their own story. It made him ashamed of the path he had taken. His own wounds had turned him into someone who hurt others. This person's wounds had turned them into someone who simply endured. That contrast rattled him. Strength built from suffering is a language only the broken can understand. And in that moment, he realized he was standing in front of someone fluent in it. The group exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. The instructions they were given now felt cruel, dishonest. The person who hired them had painted a picture of someone deserving harm, someone dangerous, someone deceitful. What they found instead was a soul who carried quiet pain without inflicting any. The gang began to see the truth. The one who hired them wasn't motivated by justice. They were motivated by insecurity, by fear of losing control, by jealousy that someone could remain kind despite being deeply wounded. That realization planted guilt heavy enough to break the toughest exterior among them. The man who seemed to lead the group took a slow breath and stepped back. He had lived long enough to recognize real courage when he saw it. And the courage in front of him didn't come from confidence. It came from survival. It came from years of learning how to keep walking even when the world tried to turn them into something cruel. That kind of courage commands respect naturally, without shouting, without force. Violence suddenly felt like an insult, not to the person they were sent to hurt, but to themselves. to the men they used to be before life twisted them. A strange silence formed between them, not tension. Recognition. The gang expected another disposable job, but what they got was a reminder of their own humanity. They felt the sting of knowing they were participating in someone else's insecurity. They felt the shame of being used as weapons instead of men. And they felt the unexpected pull of wanting to protect the person they were supposed to break. Pain recognizes pain. Strength recognizes strength. And truth exposes every lie it touches. The gang looked around, realizing all at once that they had been tricked into someone else's bitterness. Eventually, one of them spoke. Not a threat, not an insult. A quiet apology shaped by disbelief. He didn't even know why the words left his mouth. They simply did. The others nodded, unable to meet the target's eyes. Shame can humble even the toughest. They walked away without glancing back, each man carrying a weight heavier than the job they were supposed to complete. They weren't broken by fear. They were broken by truth. The truth that they were about to harm someone who had already survived enough. Someone undeserving of more pain. Someone far stronger than the people hiding behind money and instructions. Sometimes the world sends harm wrapped in human form, disguised as anger, jealousy, or unfinished wounds. Sometimes cruelty arrives in faces that don't even understand why they're doing what they're doing. Yet what nobody tells you is that certain hearts carry a presence that even harm cannot stand against. It's not because the person is physically intimidating. It's not because they fight back with force. It's because there is a stillness inside them that danger cannot interpret. A quiet resilience born from surviving emotional storms that would have crushed someone else. Harm is used to victims panicking, begging, reacting. But when harm meets someone who has already been reshaped by betrayal, silence becomes armor. Calm becomes a weapon. A steady gaze becomes truth. And truth humbles even the darkest intentions. The person sent to break them suddenly feels smaller, unsure, almost ashamed. Because hurting someone who carries pain with grace feels like an act against humanity itself. In toxic relationships, this same phenomenon often unfolds. The one who inflicted psychological chaos expects the same reactions each time. They're familiar with breakdowns, apologies, self-blame. Their power relies on repetition. But when the heart they targeted grows wiser, their usual tactics begin failing. Manipulation doesn't land. Insults don't bruise. Disappearing acts no longer destabilize. The one who once felt fragile now carries an energy that quietly exposes the insecurities of the instigator. Harm tries to bite again, but its teeth feel dull. The dynamic flips not through confrontation, but through emotional evolution. Once confusion turns into understanding, the cycle collapses. Harm becomes humbled because its own patterns suddenly look obvious, predictable, even childish. That shift breaks the aggressor long before it empowers the survivor. There's something unsettling about standing in front of someone who should have collapsed under the weight of what was done to them, but didn't. The gang in the alley felt this. Toxic manipulators feel this. Anyone who ever tried to break a gentle spirit feels this. Because pain often breeds bitterness, but in rare souls, pain breeds clarity. They see everything now, the lies, the inconsistencies, the emotional traps. Their awareness becomes a kind of mirror that forces harm to look at itself. And when harm is forced to look closely, it recoils. People who cause pain rarely expect to meet someone they cannot intimidate. That mismatch between expectation and reality creates an internal crack. The aggressor loses rhythm. Their anger loses direction. Their motives lose justification. Harm becomes humbled not because the target fought, but because the target stood in quiet truth. There are moments when harm tries to speak, but its voice falters. When guilt rises in the chest of the attacker unexpectedly. When the person who walked forward with confidence suddenly feels the weight of their actions, as if someone placed a hand on their shoulder. And that hand isn't moral judgment. It's recognition. Recognition that the one they're facing has endured deeper wounds than anything they could inflict. Recognition that this person didn't become cruel in response. Recognition that this is someone who spent nights holding themselves together while the world tore them apart. That realization softens cruelty like water softens stone. Even the darkest intentions bow in the presence of a soul that refuses to turn bitter. In relationships, This shift appears when the person who once endured manipulation begins replying with calm instead of panic. They begin setting boundaries without fear. They stop explaining themselves. They stop giving second chances to those who throw first injuries. The manipulator feels the imbalance immediately. Their usual tools become useless. Their rehearsed monologues fall flat. Their attempts to provoke are met with neutrality. It's as if harm itself realizes it cannot enter the same doorway anymore. The target has outgrown the emotional space where destruction once lived. And harm, unable to function without reaction, collapses under its own emptiness. Sometimes the world tests certain hearts repeatedly, not to break them, but to reveal them. And when harm encounters these hearts, the tables turn without anyone raising a hand. The gang hired for violence couldn't understand why their strength felt pointless. Toxic partners cannot understand why their dominance evaporates. People who gossip, sabotage, or envy suddenly feel exposed. Because kindness mixed with self-awareness creates an aura no hostility can overpower. Harm becomes humbled when it realizes its presence cannot provoke fear. Fear is its oxygen. Without it, cruelty suffocates. The one meant to be harmed unknowingly becomes the reason harm dissolves. There's a moment when the aggressor walks away not because they were defeated, but because their conscience cracked. They see themselves through the lens of the one they intended to hurt, and that reflection disturbs them. It forces questions they never wanted to ask. Why am I doing this? Who have I become? Why does this person feel stronger in their silence than I do in my violence? Those questions haunt them long after the moment ends. Harm leaves humbled because it encountered someone whose pain did not make them cruel, but wise. Someone who did not mirror the darkness thrown at them. Someone who embodied the very strength of harm. Bringers lost long ago. In a toxic dynamic, the moment harm becomes humbled marks the beginning of liberation. The survivor steps into a chapter defined by clarity rather than confusion. They stop reacting emotionally because the emotional fog has lifted. They begin choosing themselves instead of choosing the cycle. The manipulator, the abuser, the bully, they all feel this shift deeply. It unsettles them because the foundation of their control depended on confusion and fear. Once the survivors step into awareness, the entire structure collapses. The one who once controlled the narrative now stands outside of it, struggling to understand where their power went. It didn't go anywhere. It was reclaimed. When harm becomes humbled, it also becomes exposed. The aggressor must now face the reality that the person they targeted was never powerless. They were simply loyal, patient, and hopeful. And loyalty mistaken for weakness becomes a dangerous miscalculation. Because once the survivor rises, their strength makes the aggressor confront their own emptiness. Harm becomes humbled not by defeat, but by truth. And truth has a way of dismantling every false story cruelty ever told. Eventually, the world balances itself. The one who intended harm loses their edge. The one who survived gains a new kind of insight. The danger sent to break them becomes the doorway that reveals their deeper strength. And the final twist of the story is simple. Harm came expecting to win. Instead, harm left understanding that some spirits cannot be destroyed. They are too aware, too residue-aligned, and in the face of such authenticity, harm does not rise, harm bows.